All right, people are still rolling in, but that's fine. Let them get up to speed. Hey, Scott, how you doing?
Good, Daniel. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. We got Tony out there as well.
Hey
Hey, Tony.
Scott,
Hey, good to
Awesome.
see you again.
likewise.
Yeah, Scott, good to see you too. Good to see you too. I know it's been a hectic day for you, but we'll keep it moving. We don't want to take too much of your time. But before we get to that, let me get to this. Thank you everybody for jumping on. I know more of you are filing in. And please, whenever you are catching up. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, wherever you are in your time zone. But today we're going to be sitting down and kind of talking through a few of the unspoken challenges of SecDevOps, the shift left movement, policy as code, and how that is specifically happening to FinTech. I think it's a very unique year in FinTech because there's a huge digital jump going on due to the COVID pandemic. People are starting to take digital transactions and digital currency to a whole new level. And Scott, you've been in the business for a while now. We want to pick your brain. But before we get to you, and we will, don't worry. Well, let's get to us for a second here. So hi, everybody. My name is Daniel. I'm an account manager here at Magalix. I come from a DevOps background myself, working at Platform 9, doing managed Kubernetes and OpenStack to HashiCorp. And before work coming to Magalix, I was working with a lot of Fortune 500s, trying to help them figure out their DevOps journey and what it's like to communicate with vendors when you're dealing with open source and you're dealing with proprietary technology. So good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to you all. My compatriot on my side, I have Tony. I call him my technical better half. But Tony is a man of many hats at Magalix. He's a solutions architect, an OPA expert, and just an all-around guru when it comes to interacting with our customers and really moving mountains to make sure that they're successful. But Tony, you've written a few books yourself. You've been an advisor. You're a cloud native practitioner. Can't say enough about you. Happy to have you on.
Happy to be here, Dan. Thank you.
Cool. Now, guys, the topics we're going to be talking about today, right? What are the unspoken challenges? Well, let's break that down a little bit. We're going to be getting into, number one, why HSBC, one of the global banks, leading global banks in the world, is investing in SecDevOps. Why policy as code, right? Like, what's this movement going on here? The hurdle of SecDevOps. And then really kind of making sure you pick what's right for you, whether that's open source, whether that's going with a vendor like us here at Magalix. And then lastly, Scott, this one's going to be for you, but what would you have done different, right? And we'll get to your journey in a second. But without further ado, let me introduce our guest today. Happy to have you on, Scott Surovich from HSBC. But you're more than just a lead global container engineer. You're an author, you're a hockey player, you're a 3D printing guru based off of the T-Rex that we saw in the background there. I think it's over there in the back right there. So Scott, thank you for jumping on. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of why you've gotten into the space you've gotten into.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. First of all, of course, thanks, Daniel, and Tony and guys for having me on to do something. People that know me will tell you I like to talk. So if I'm given the avenue to do so, I will. So it's great to just be on here and to discuss this. So as you're saying, I'm with HSBC Bank. I've actually been at HSBC Bank for 19 years now. A little stint where I left to do some other things for about 9 months, but came back because I really enjoyed the company and the people. There's just some stellar employees globally on it, and it's just a great experience. So I've had many different hats at the bank. Obviously, you can imagine over 19 years. It's between Windows engineering, Linux engineering, Citrix engineering, virtualization for quite a long time is my main role. And once Kubernetes came around, even before that, a little bit Mesosphere, but you started to see where this could take the enterprise, and especially with the release of Kubernetes 1.6. Once you started getting into RBAC, we just started to really get into it. So it became a geeky passion of mine, and I know I'm not super unique there. Tony, I'm sure, same thing. I can name at least 4 people at the bank, same thing. So it just kind of grabbed us, I'm guessing, and you just have fun with it. And not to mention the benefits that can happen from it. And as you said, in some of my free time, The hockey playing, something that honestly I would quit work and do it all day, every day, but I'm not quite that good. I'm also not that young anymore for that, so that's not going to work out. And 3D printing, I'm a freak about it. Guru is probably being nice. I have 8 3D printers now.
What?
So they're always printing.
Wow.
It takes a long time to print, and I have a lot of fun designing the stuff
Nice.
and printing things. So appreciate it.
That's wild, man. That's wild. Yeah, you're telling me about the Captain America and now the T-Rex and all that good stuff going on. So
Yeah.
that's exciting.
In front of my house, my landscaping is mostly the Avengers, which happen to be 4 and 5 foot tall figures that I've printed. So,
man, I can
yeah.
only imagine your house for Halloween. Anyways, guys, I know a lot of people on the call, especially those of us in North America, we're not as familiar with HSBC. So I wanted to share this just quickly to give a scope of what Scott's dealing with on a day-to-day. Scott, you got almost 4,000 offices. We're talking 90,000 plus servers, 21 data centers. I mean, these are video game numbers, right? But you guys have also made a bet in the cloud as well, and you have pools of infrastructure everywhere. So could you kind of talk to us through like some of the day-to-day of kind of managing something as Goliath as this?
Yeah, it takes a fleet of people to do that, and as you can see at the bottom, when you have 40,000 IT professionals, now this slide's a bit out of date. It's about a year and a half old, but the numbers aren't too far off. Some increase, some go down. But yeah, like I said, we have of course partnered with Amazon and Google, and with some Azure, all 3, to be honest. And if you're going out into China area, there's of course Ali. So yeah, we're consumers all across the board, running something like Kubernetes as well. And we try internally to, I'm going to say, stay at the same type of offering across all of them, because you guys can imagine that'd be a nightmare if we just all of them went in their own direction. Some things have to. There's always the cloud native portion that the vendors will offer, and there's benefit to that. But probably some of the decisions we can talk about in a little bit is we don't always use the native offering for certain things, because we have to consider a lot of things in a highly regulated industry like we are. So we honestly, I think, have some of the best people I've ever worked with. Again, I've been here 19 years, and why would I do that? I like the people that I work with. I trust the people. We got just some talent that's really good, and that's what makes it successful.
Yeah, no doubt. And as we've been able to connect with you over the last, 6-7 months, both from a personal standpoint and professional standpoint, it shows through. You guys enjoy what you do, and you guys are incredibly good at it. That's why we wanted to have you on, and some of the learnings we've taken and we've incorporated for us as well. It's been incredible. So again, thank you for your time. And for the folks on the call, we're going to be spending the next 35 minutes talking through some of the bullet points that I highlighted earlier. And then we're going to save a little bit of time at the end for questions, whether that's for, really Tony, myself, or Scott. Well, we'll get your questions answered. But I'm going to take off the video here. This is a campfire chat, and we just want to make sure that you guys can see our faces here. So Scott, to lead things off, right, why did you guys decide to shift left? And I think this is such an industry term, and shout out to all our marketing departments for pushing it through. But really, it's the idea of codifying your policies and moving them to the left. I think that's the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, there's more things to consider than that, right? When we're dealing with a world of dynamic infrastructure, secrets, credentials, all these things are taking a shift to the left. So number one, where did that decision come from? I think for us here at Magalix, we talk to a number of prospects and we hear, oh yeah, this is something that the DevOps team, we want to kind of push through and gain a little bit more ownership. But we also hear that, hey, our CISO is asking us to codify and start, mandating these enforcements starting earlier within the pipeline. So what did that story look like for you? Why did you guys make that decision? Was it, as I guess, was it top down or bottom up?
I'll take the last part. It's both. As our execs, they keep on the technology. They know what the shifts are. They talk to the CEOs at Google, CEOs at Amazon, CEOs at vendors. So they know where that goes. And of course, the geeks like us down in the trenches, we're always playing with it and wanting to go that way. And then, of course, developers. If you want to be quick, you'll throw around the terms. You want to be agile. You want to get into that. You have to shift. You want new features going out to your customers. You have to stay ahead of competition in the legacy way or heritage way, depending on which term you want to use. You just couldn't. You can't do that. Obviously, you've got your VM with all your processes. You want to upgrade one. Well, now you need that downtime. How do you schedule that? And that's why releases were slow. And if they weren't slow, they were painful because you had people working 2 a.m. You were doing 80-hour weeks because you're trying to work outside of Windows because they just weren't made to be rolling upgraded. Or you didn't have the capacity to say, okay, you know what, I want to do a rolling upgrade. Let's install 20 new VMs or 20 new physical servers just to shift overloads. And just couldn't be done. And of course, in today's world, come on, security. Security was always important, but even more so now. Nobody wants to be on the front page of anything. I mean, that's just, brand. Awesome. You got to keep your brand. But we want to protect the customers. We want to protect ourselves. So let's check that in every step of the process and get it early. Find out what the problems are. Hopefully there are no problems that get deployed. Like they say, all this helped us to develop quick, fail fast, just so you can get stuff resolved.
Yeah, that's huge. But what you're talking about, I think for a lot of people on the call is like this nirvana of communication, of culture and tech. How long has it taken you guys to kind of get to this point, right? Of saying, hey, look, we're going to go the container route. We're doing multi-cloud, and now we want to shift our mindset left, right? Can you give us a rough idea of how long that's kind of taken for you guys to get to this point?
Yeah, it's not done. I think it's going to be something that all companies are still evolving too. It's kind of like when somebody says, how often do you upgrade Kubernetes? I'm like, oh boy, that's you're going to go every 3 months at a minimum, not counting the miners in there for any kind of security. So I think the processes change too. There's tools coming out. There's vendors offering solutions. When you're getting into policies, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that for you guys.
Yeah.
It's that kind of stuff that when we started, you're doing OPA policies. Great, we have them. We have multiple clusters. How do we make sure that those policies are in fact installed on each one? And if we update one or add one, what do we do? How do we keep a library of those? And policy as code. What tools can you use? So it's evolving, but I'd say the journey probably been 2-3 years now.
Wow.
We were doing some stuff in the cloud before that as well, but it's just now that we're getting the teams forming. The communication, like you said, is breaking down those barriers in a typical enterprise to get people talking, agreeing, and again, it works surprisingly well, more because of the people. When you all agree that this is the way you want to go, that's when you get people lined up, and you don't quite run into the fiefdoms, as they'll say, to say, nope, this is my space, this is this space, we got to do it this way, and you try to work with everybody.
Yeah, that's huge, and we hear that a lot with some of our customers as well, and even talking to you guys, right? It's almost the cultural aspect is a little bit more difficult than the technical aspect. And that's what really pops out to us. Now, before I give the ball off to Tony, you mentioned OPA, and it's a chapter in your book. I wanted to talk about that for a second, right? And Tony, before you jump in, really, outside the chapter, what motivated you to write the book? Kubernetes and Docker, a deployment guide. Can you kind of walk us through your thought process behind that?
Yeah, I honestly, because a lot of the topics that we cover in there, you start to look for, and you can find blogs, you can find little things here and there, but as many people on the phone, I'm sure, have seen, you get a blog with 2 pages and be like, cool, maybe I did those steps, but what did I do? Certain people, sure, you're going to pick up. If you've been in the industry a while, you'll figure it out. Tony goes to these sites. You need a starting point, but that doesn't help the other people trying to get in. And Mark, who's my co-author, we just kind of said, you know what, there'd be some good topics here. And we would live and breathe this every day. Why don't we just write some stuff down? And of course, we hope for the best, that people care, that they want to read it, that they like the topics. And it has been well received. It's all timing. You know, if you go out to look at the books today, you'll find a ton of intro books of here's how you create a stateful set. Here's how you do a pod. Here's what you do here. And that's great. You got to start there. But nothing really got into, I'll call it day 2. Although I say that enterprise guide, yeah, I'm like, that should really be day 1.
Yeah.
But back when this all started, people weren't thinking about policies. They weren't thinking even of PSPs and down the line. Most people got their clusters deployed and then some basic functionality in there for some security and logging. But especially authentication, that was a big push for us. We've noticed a lot of people really did not understand how to integrate a provider like an OIDC and how you would integrate that with Active Directory or LDAP or SAML, you know, whatever you want to use. And that's where we evolved from there, saying, great, you've got the users that you want to put in the policies. Now, what do you use for those? And we do deal with PSPs because you have to currently. As we all know, it's being deprecated. And that's why we had the OPA to get in there. And logically, that'll be the replacement for PSPs. Not for me to say, I'm not on the SecDevOps or that, but it makes logical sense with the graduation, a month ago of the project. Yeah. So I think you see a lot of people hopping into that. And then, of course, security. We talk about Falco and why you would implement Falco, because OPA is great. That can stop things. But what if something doesn't stop? You need to know the auditability on that part, that if somebody did exec into something, what did they do? What did they touch? You know, what's your, as I use all the time, forensic footprint? We need to know that information just for ourselves and potentially for legal purposes. So it's what we wrote the book for. We had fun, honestly. Working with Mark was great. Long nights, took 8 months, but you get it out there. And again, you don't get rich off books at all, not in computers. You want to do that, you write nonfiction. But it was to really, we wanted to help. I'm a trainer by trade. That's what I did for years before HSBC. And that's my only way to keep doing it, is to write something like that.
Awesome. And we'll talk about how people on the call can get that book at the end. But now, Tony, let's shift gears to you guys. Obviously, that's the bulk of what we want to hear. Tony and Scott, you guys conversating. So Tony, I know you got some questions. Let's get them out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dan. So I know you touched a lot on, OPA, kind of, forensic footprint. I guess, for those that are just starting this SecDevOps journey, they'll see OPA, policy as code, like you said, they'll see these blog posts, but there's really no translation from, these instructions into how to apply it into a real world use case, right? And so I guess just in your own terms, for those that are just starting, what is OPA and, what do you use it for?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's funny because you hear about OPA now and all you ever think about is people talk about Kubernetes. Yeah. Which of course is not the case, but that's what's bringing it to the front, which is great. So just as the industry as a whole, what it can give you is great. So we'll talk about, obviously, like you said, Tony, the Kubernetes side. Yeah. But I boil it down to people that say it's a decision engine, basically. Can you or can't you? That's what it comes down to. Yeah. So, okay, you want to do what? Okay, you want to deploy this, and you want to do host path on your deployment, and they're going to say, oh, no, that's bad. We don't want you to do that. So OPA just has something in it that says, yep, if this contains that, deny. Mm-hmm. And it's great for that, giving you security. Now, you can take that then for validation too. It's not just deny, but, is it acceptable? So it's great in the Kubernetes side, but now let's add that to Terraform. Let's do that with, and having the same kind of engine instead of having to have 20 products to do that. Because of course, Terraform has their own thing already. But the more you can centralize multiple functions into one, as we talked about earlier, stuff's moving so fast that we have to stay on top of it. And if you start doing that with 20 different tools, it becomes a big challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, for those that are just starting out in this journey, I think one of the things that they could be misled down this path of, hey, OPA or Open Policy Agent can solve all my problems, right? Once I have OPA, installed, uh, I'm secure, right? Or I've got my governance covered. So from your own experience, where do you think what is an OPA good for?
Oh, that's a tricky question, isn't it, Tony?
Yeah.
It it first of all, I can tell you one thing with our tool. So when we had our first ever kind of cluster that we were kicking around, and we're trying to feel out what offering we'd even use. So what flavor?
Yeah.
One of the first tools we brought in was OPA. So we had OPA just because we needed the guardrails there.
Yeah.
And honestly, like you said, it can do so much.
Right.
So when you get into Rego, that now, of course, learning, it's another concept. There's definitely a learning curve on getting into that. We got somebody on my team that's awesome at it and really enjoys Rego. So to enjoy that, I don't know what you got to be thinking, but he loves it. So he lives and breathes it. You don't need that because, of course, the Slack channel is great. There's people to help. There's, of course, collections of those. So you can get different policies if you go to the sites. But let's assume it can't stop something, or you don't have a policy to stop something that you don't even know about. So if you're running OPA, not Gatekeeper, you don't have that auditability, really. So you won't even know something's happening till it happens. And people always say, well, I've got these guardrails in place already. So it could be a PSP. It could be, you're running OpenShift, which has some built-in already. But you have to have extra. And it's not just the security, though. It's stability, as I say. So everybody thinks OPA might just do security side. You have to have a trusted registry. You can't create host path. You can't do an IPC mechanism. You can't run elevated privileges or run as root.
Right.
But that's only half of it to me. And stuff like checking ingress rules to make sure you don't have duplicates. I'm a big fan of multi-tenant simply because I'm utilizing my hardware correctly, not wasting resources. So, but I have to make sure now that people are playing in the same playground, that they don't bump heads on certain things like an ingress rule. And ingress was one of the first reasons we brought it in, to be honest, not even a security standpoint. Because when people were starting to test Kubernetes to kick it around, they'd make an ingress called test.
Right.
Pretty logical. A lot of people do that. Problem is when 10 people do that, you don't know which one. You got these ingress rules, and then stuff like that happened. So it's an ever-evolving process. You ask, what doesn't it cover?
Yeah.
And other than once you're in a pod, so once something's deployed, OPA's not going to help you a lot. Yeah. It's there as the admission to say, okay, and you have to know that. It's not a limitation, it's a design. That's what it's meant to do.
Yeah.
Right.
So, if your pod's already running, not going to help you.
Gotcha.
And whatever goes into that.
Gotcha.
So I think people have to realize that, how it works,
100%.
to understand what else you might need.
100%.
Yeah.
And when we talk to, our customers, where, and it's really funny, it's two different conversations, right? It's, oh, have you tried OPA? Yes, I never want to do it again. Rego's terrible. And then they try, vendors like us and Magalix, where we kind of give you the playbooks and we give you the ability to get going out of the box. Because like you said, right? Who likes living in Rego? It's a tough world to play in. And we're seeing the community really latch onto it. So that's cool. And I love what you said about OPA, where a decision needs to be made. I've always loved that, the way you express that. So that's really cool.
Yeah, so we talked. You mentioned that's a good segue. Talking a little bit about the hurdles, right? You talked about you had this test cluster or this cluster you were kicking around, testing ingress, applying the policy, just kind of checking to see what's happening. But as you start learning more, and as that project internally matures, and you start thinking about, okay, I want to move this into a production workload. What are some of the technical challenges that you ran into when making that shift from, your sandbox to, the production workloads?
Yeah, some of the challenges. The shift was onboarding in general. I think we've seen this a lot. Is it's a whole new way for developers, or I even just saying developers, users of the cluster. Because you're going to get a lot of the off-the-shelf apps now that can come in like that. So they're not developing, but you might get a Helm chart, you might get a deployment. Could be a couple of things. It is a different world from virtualization, and even PCF or Cloud Foundry stuff. So what we tend to run into a lot is wasted resources. So for an example, requests. So, it's getting into the geeky side of Kubernetes, obviously, but people would try to deploy something and say, well, I want 4 CPUs as my request. What they don't realize is that's a reservation in Kubernetes, and nobody else can touch those now. So you're running a server at 100% request, so can't reschedule. Kubernetes scheduler will say, yep, nothing goes there.
Right.
But yet it's at 2% utilization. So you have to intimately know your application to know what does it need to turn the lights on, start up and schedule, and then limits, of course, as well. And if you don't set those values, you start getting phone calls that say, I'm getting out of memory problems. And it's because your limit's too low. So you got to optimize. And in the old days, what we did on VMs is we just said, throw resources at it. Whatever's not used will just be used by somebody else. Well, you don't have that with like request. It's like, no, it's pretty selfish. And it says, nope, that's mine.
Yeah, because if you you throw in a policy that says, you have to set your limits, and maybe if you take it a step further, you could say, those limits can't be above, like a memory 2 gigs or something like that, right? And I'm sure you start implementing these policies, and no matter how much you try to educate, especially in a large organization like HSBC, sometimes that message doesn't come across as lore, right? And so I'm guessing what could happen is you put in a policy, you try to educate, and then the developer says, hey, wait a minute, where's my stuff, right? Nothing's deployed. And so I'm sure there's some kind of cultural challenge there too, right? And so could you talk a little bit about any type of these cultural challenges that you may have run into?
I'm trying to think in a better way, Tony. So when you say a cultural challenge,
right? So
like
because when you're mature in DevOps, it's almost like a no ops team, right? Because the developer can just schedule, they have the power, and one day they're just like, what's going on? I don't like this. And it's not necessarily, the ops guys, what are they doing? Everything's down, right? And so you get from this technical challenge to now just like, emotions, right? And that's what I mean by cultural, right? Like, like this happens all the time. And this is not something that people openly, blog about as often as they do on the technical side. So it'd be kind of interesting to hear, maybe some of your experiences kind of more on the softer side of things.
Yeah, we came into the cultural side because, go back to, again, it's changed a lot. So legacy days, if you're a Windows Linux person in a lot of, especially a big organization, your life is, deploying your platform, giving people what they need with their server, and you often walk away. So in my previous roles, I'm like, okay, yep, I owned, 600 Windows servers under my name, a couple hundred Linux machines at a time. I couldn't have told you every application that was on there, but I didn't need to be honest. So here's your stuff. That's great.
Yeah.
I couldn't know all the applications, as you saw on that list. So many servers out there, and we are a global organization. I don't just deal in the United States. You get the questions from China, from UK, and not just me. My UK counterparts will get questions from the US people. So, doing it that way. So we wanted to make sure that when we got into, say, the agile space, the microservices space, that we did give the developers as much control as you can with guardrails.
Yeah.
And that's a cultural shift.
Right.
Is, okay, you know what? here's your stuff. In our case, let's say for an example, a multi-tenant, a namespace with enough guardrails on it. So quotas, as an example, you definitely don't want to say no quotas. So you can do almost everything you want in there. Obviously, you can't do cluster level stuff. You can't do CRDs, daemon sets. But you want ingress, it's yours. You want some PVCs, it's yours. All within, again, default guardrails.
Yeah.
Now, of course, people outgrow that. That's understood. We have to increase those quotas. So, we have automation in place for namespaces, setting up the initial quota. We're trying to figure out other ways to automate. Internally, you want to be like the cloud. You have to be.
Yeah.
You got competition now outside your own organization for your own people. And you go to the best logical place between cost offerings, solutions, and that. So the biggest shift is the communication. Again, because in my years, I didn't have to worry about the developers as much. And it's not that I didn't want to. I didn't have time. And I don't know what benefit I would have offered.
Yeah.
It's just a server. Now, in this case, we have communications with them. I deal with people I've never had to in the past, and it's made the job fun.
Yeah.
It makes it stressful because you got a lot of questions coming in, but you learn so much. And honestly, you look back now and say, wow, what could we have done better in the virtualization days? Had we had this communication, rather than making a developer feel like they were being tied down by something we thought they needed or wanted, but it was wrong. And now we get into that. You need the service mesh? Okay, great. We'll look into that. You need multi-cluster mesh? Okay, we got that on the radar. Help us, decide how we're going to do this. I don't know if that answers that.
No,
question,
it does.
Tony. Yeah.
It does, because I think back in the days, it was us versus them, or them versus us, depending on which side of the fence you were on. But now, we start building this harmony, and truly dev and ops, right? Because one person leverages the software, another team leverages the hardware, for all intents and purposes, right? Hardware. And so once you figure out how to maximize those two to work together perfectly, then obviously, innovation should start taking off, right? And your agility should start, going through the roof, right? That's the idea, at least. So, I think culturally,
it does, and I can't escape it.
Yeah. So culturally,
so my brother actually is a developer. So, yep. So I go to family dinner, and I hear my brother complaining about his DBAs or his server guys, and I'm sitting there going, wait a minute. I complain about people like you. I said, we need to talk. And that he said the same thing. They don't ask. They just say, hey, Chris, here's what you get. And he's like, I can't, that doesn't work. I can't use that. So it's great. And I actually came from a developer background. That was one of the first things I did many years ago. Honestly, back then, I just kind of got bored with it. It was COBOL, to be honest. I didn't have a lot of fun in COBOL. So I went to the infrastructure space.
Yeah.
So I try not to forget that I liked programming, and I wouldn't want somebody, putting all the guardrails. There has to be some. There's got to be give and take on both sides to say, we realize that you can't just give us all this dedicated stuff the way we want. But, it's compromise.
Yeah. And I think that really highlights this SecDevOps, I guess, movement. I think of it as DevOps 2.0 in my own head. And I think it really outlines, how to solve this challenge of how do you continue to take advantage of DevOps' agility, this collaborative, effort that, internal teams are doing, but also, maintaining this, being secure, like you said, like there's a brand aspect, customer data, user data, especially in FinTech, you're talking about, money, right? My finances, right? And which is like ultra sensitive. And so I think, I think you highlighted, which is really, the communication, working together, coming together to solve, the organization's biggest challenges, right? Which is moving fast, innovating while being secure. So I think it's a great example of that.
And one thing I love,
Definitely.
Scott, you said was the guardrails piece. because effectively we communicate a lot of that with our customers as well. It's like, hey, you need guardrails, right? Everyone's moving as quick as possible. We're not telling you to slow down. We're just telling you that there's a freeway. Here's some lanes. Let's keep everyone moving orderly, right? And I think that's something that resonates with us, and I'm glad it resonates with you. But Tony, Scott, I just wanted to jump in. 7 minutes left, guys. I see some questions coming through. Awesome stuff. We're gonna stop at that 45 mark and get those questions answered. But Tony, Scott, just so you guys know, 7 more minutes for open discussion.
Cool. I have one last one on the hurdles, right? Because this is interesting because if you're in a small organization, you might have like a gold star team player that seems to know how to do everything, right? But in a large organization, you try to implement SecDevOps, and it's not just policies, right? There's like image scanning, like where is the developer pulling their base containers from, right? There's like code analysis, and there's all these other I guess for lack of better term, steps involved, right, to secure the software development lifecycle. And so to the best of your knowledge, how, especially in a large organization, you may not have access to the CI/CD solution, right? You may not even know the person that manages that. They may be on the other side of the globe. So what are some things that you have seen that gets everyone kind of on the same page? Like how does the CI person do their thing? How does someone like you do their thing? And then how does the security folks get involved, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, we definitely ran into it especially at the start. Makes some sense, especially before you have official projects. I mean, it's a large organization. We have different priorities, and the reason Kubernetes actually has been very successful for us, or that shift, I'll say in general. Let's forget saying just Kubernetes, but again, it's the geekiness of the people I work with. I mean, we actually had phone calls at night that we would just talk about Kubernetes and what we should do, and with people all over the globe. Yeah, I might have been up at 3 a.m. because I was talking to somebody that could be in Hong Kong, and they did the same thing. So we got that communication out, and that started it. And I look back now and think if we didn't do that, we probably wouldn't be where we are today. We just had to jump. And that always helps because you had that head start. And that's why we've partnered with other vendors like Google, and that they ask for opinions, as I'm sure you guys have seen, because it is still in its infancy in general. So that helped to a point, obviously. And we had different teams involved. So on those phone calls, we had networking guys. Granted, some of those people I knew for years, but not to that level. I used to need networking things. I'd send in a request, so I knew who these people were, but we never had to truly bounce ideas off of each other. And probably one of the unique things in this side of the house being, the microservices, I don't see personally, and this is not just our company, but I've seen it other ones where I've just talked to people, you see a collaboration that just you didn't see in distributed compute before, where you did get the us versus them thing. And it could very well be that people realize the stuff's merging. At some point, Kubernetes, you read the documents now, people are saying, wow, in 2021, it's going to become the orchestrator of the data center. So that's going to be VM, storage, networking. It does a bunch of that already, as we know, but you see the vendors pushing that more. So like you brought up scanning.
Yeah.
So obviously cybersecurity, they're involved. Where we store our registries, where we store containers, you probably take some kind of artifactory that you had before, and maybe it can do registry, but that's probably a different team as well.
Yeah.
So you have to talk among each other. We've done, we've just taken it upon ourselves as the leaders of certain technologies to have calls. And we'll have cybersecurity on. We'll have all the different cloud people that we have on. It might be the specialist for Amazon, specialist for, GCP, the cyber people, might be somebody who's a developer. And we try to do these calls. We do that one on a bi-weekly basis. We do try to do a customer forum where you bring in the developers, talk about what your roadmap might be, let them offer input. let them hear what's going on instead of doing this whole designing in a vacuum or a bubble,
Yeah.
and then they suddenly have the product and they just don't like it.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. I could talk to you for hours on that subject alone. But we have 2 minutes. I have shifting the conversation a little bit. You mentioned a little bit about vendors and experts. A quick one for the folks out there. This is always the question that comes up. Build versus buy, right? I could just especially when it comes to be specific. Let's talk about policies, right? Because we could talk about all the different other components. Build versus buy. Just real quick, what are your thoughts on that? How does somebody tackle that question?
Yeah, I've been asked it a couple times, like a KubeCon presentation and stuff like that. And I'm a big open source fan, obviously, but highly regulated industry. Again, we always say that, saying, "Oh, that's really important." Let's be honest. Yeah, sure it is, but the mom and pop shop that might be running it for something, that's just as important. I hate to say big is better. It's really not. Everybody's got their own reasoning for that. So point is, let's just say you were using open source on something and something breaks. Now, this could be your mom and pop shop. Doesn't matter. It means your systems are down. What help do you get? You get the GitHub issues. Now, every vendor does something different there. A support question might just be deleted. I've seen that. They're like, "Oh, that doesn't count. It's not a bug." So that's relative. I won't pick on everybody for that. But when you buy, there's a reason you buy. And it's not necessarily for the product. It's for the support. So could I get everything open source? Probably a lot of it. But again, how do I tell any kind of regulatory compliance people, yeah, I'll fix it at some point. There's no SLA if it's open source. I'm like, yeah, that could be 3 days. It could be 2 hours. When you have a vendor, you've got your SLA set. And you say, okay, and I've got the experts, and we all know this. You can be really good at Kubernetes. You can be really good at something else. But when it breaks and you've never seen it, you can logically look at where to go, but it could still take you hours to fix it. Yeah. And you got to call the experts.
Yeah, for sure.
No doubt. So that gets us to the 45 mark. Great chat. And Scott, just to echo back and Tony, we could probably talk for a couple more hours. But for the sake of time and then, keeping everyone's agenda, we got a few questions rolling through. Don't know if we're going to get to all of these guys, so I apologize. But pick up some of the ones I think are pertinent here. Number one, I guess this is for you, Scott. What are some other areas of security and compliance that people may not necessarily know they need to secure? Any of these areas specific to your industry in FinTech, what are some of those that pop out to you?
There are some, and I wouldn't say anything specific so much to FinTech, but we're tackling that question for just financial sector in general with the CNCF Financial Services Working Group. So we've gotten together with the CNCF to start talking about what are the best uses for, I'm going to say, securing using cloud native products. So we're talking about policies. What are some policies that may not be included with OPA or Falco or something else? And it's not that those wouldn't work for other people. It's just that in the financial services world, you might think of that, some other things. So the one I see people don't ever think of is runtime security. You often get people to say you've got your OPA, you've got Sysdig, you've got Splunk, you've got some kind of alerting mechanism, an alert manager, whatever it might be. But people forget that if I exec into a container, that at that point, the API server is not logging anything.
Right.
So what's going on once they're in? And you have to look at that somehow. And that's where I bring up the tools like Falco, open source project, part of the CNCF, that I know what you did. And I'll know what file. And I even can make a dynamic network policy. I just demoed this about an hour ago at Developer Week, where if you modified a file, I made a network policy through a function using kubeless that created a ingress egress denial for everything. So pod's running perfectly fine, but somebody went in to change a file. It could have been a shell script that's going to make it a malware, ransomware, whatever deployment. But because of the exact thing that they did, without looking at it, it just isolates. But notice, not delete. Everybody else wants to do a delete, but I want that container because I want to know what happened in it. I don't want to lose what they did by deleting it. And people don't think about that either. You'll mitigate the problem by deleting it, but now you don't know what happened inside because it's ephemeral. That's all gone now. I want to know the script. I want to know what they put in. So you can make all these rules. Yeah. I don't know that addresses it, but I think runtime's a big one. I think we're hearing a lot. Image scanning people hear about, pretty common, but that runtime portion.
That's great insight. So thank you for sharing that. And I guess this is for both of you. So whoever wants to take a stab at it, excuse me, please go ahead. But a little earlier question along in our conversation, what's the learning curve of OPA? And how much time does it take to enforce policies into your infrastructure if you want to go that route?
I talked a lot. I'll let Tony start that.
Oh, I mean, this is from my own personal journey. Rego had me scratching my head for some time. Right? It's not like, it's a traditional programming language. Looking at the examples, it's like, I want to apply this to Kubernetes right now, right? And so that transition from learning Rego to, the Kubernetes application, and then learning, how to implement it, whether I'm doing this, queue management or gatekeeper, it took me, I would say, 4 to 6 weekends, right? Of just hammering it out. And in terms of getting it into the infrastructure, probably in dev, probably for me, 4 to 6 weekends, right? Because, at the time when I was learning this, that wasn't my, core responsibility. So I kind of learned it on the side. But it wasn't easy. Obviously that's relative. But for me personally, not coming from a developer background, I've been systems like you. I started COBOL in high school. I gave that up real quick, right? I'm an NT4 MCSE, if that dates me a little bit, right? Yeah. And so, I come from a systems and networking side of things. So trying to pick up, Rego was a little bit tough for me personally at first. But, once you get going and understanding, like you said, it's either yes or no, it's a decision engine. Then I had that moment where it clicked, right? And now I'm just like, I'm like creating policies like no other. So, that's my own personal experience.
I would echo that as well, though, Tony. So we like my counterpart Sandro, who does that work. He's a developer, very good developer. So he took it to it a little bit easier than me when I started it. But there's also more tools now. So there's actually editors now that can do breakpoints, whereas before you just wrote your policy and said, "Let's see if it works," and it didn't. And you'd say, "Oh man, there was just no way to test it." But now there's tools for that. There's vendors that help with this, with other tools. Like anything, I think this industry, we forgot that new stuff can be challenging. Because before Kubernetes, what was the newest thing? Virtualization. How old was virtualization? Yeah, sure, there was OpenStack and stuff, yes, but let's be honest, it didn't take off like people thought. So when VMs first came out, I remember people being really confused. Like, why would I do that? What do I care? I don't trust it. Multiple things on one server? No, that's bad. And I heard that a lot with Kubernetes, you probably guys as well. We like the idea, but it's too hard. It is, but it's not once you learn it. Since when did we become so lazy that we said, it's not easy, I don't want to do it? If it is difficult to implement, policy I think of is the front end is so easy to use. You want to deploy? Cool, push, done. That probably means the back end is very complex because it's helping you and doing everything for you. So there's a learning curve. And the same with Rego as well. But once you get it, enforcing the policies is easy. That's the other part of that question. It's just having the right Rego. And then it just works. Yeah,
no doubt. No doubt. I think you guys touched on some good points there. Moving along, I think we've got time for 2 more questions, and then Scott will finish it off as mentioned. But, Scott, this one's for you. Being in banking and with all the regulations and infrastructure crossing borders, how do you keep track of the state of your production environment? So this is a good one. What types of information are you looking for?
Yeah, so we're kind of fortunate here. We've made global teams a long time ago. So whether this happens to be, Kubernetes, or whether it happens to be virtualization, As I said, I think for at least the last 12 years, I've done global types of roles. So I didn't have the luxury of just looking at stuff in Buffalo, stuff in Chicago, stuff in New York City. So we need some standard set. And let's face it, it helps you run the infrastructure better, in theory cheaper, use the talent where it is. You also get, follow the sun support. There's so many benefits to it. So we try to roll things up into into a master primary server. So we get dashboards. So, I always tell people it's not a lot different from supporting just your local region. It's just you've got more boxes. And providing you've got the links to do all that, of course, and redundancy and network infrastructure, you can keep track of it that way. I won't say there aren't still challenges. There definitely can be, but I think we've done a pretty good job of it, as some other global organizations I've spoken to have. Now, certain regulations about crossing the border stuff can be more challenging, like Switzerland, places where I'm not allowed to necessarily get into a server just because of the government regulations and data. So we do deal with those on a I'm going to say a special use case basis, but we have standards for how they should build the things. So this way, if something were to go wrong, they should be able to ask me a question, and I shouldn't have to reverse engineer. So it's all about standards.
Yeah, well put. And then guys, about 6 minutes left. Quick, Tony, I'll start with you. 1 minute, just dive into it. Predictions for security, the shift left movement, and the SecDevOps in general in 2021. Tony, we'll start with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot more AI involved, a lot more, and that's going to be for automated remediation of these things, right? I think once you have the analytics and you see these patterns, like the old IPsec type of thing, anomaly detection. I think this is going to start happening within Kubernetes if it's not now, and then they're going to take that knowledge and apply that to product, and it's going to start automating all of these fixes. So I think that's if I were a gambling man, I would bet on that.
Scott?
Yep. I would actually echo that. My favorite term for like the last year and a half has been DevOps AI or DevSec AI, whatever you want to call it. Like I mentioned, my kubeless function, that's a great idea. However, it has no thought process. So what about a data set, like Tony's saying, behind the scenes that says, you know what, this namespace always has this happening and we know it's legit. So we can write routines to say, yep, not an anomaly. That is an anomaly. And you just can't do that by naming the namespace, because that doesn't help. You need to see the actions and do that. So if I'm sending it to like PubSub on GCP, I can then do some analytics by sending it over to, BigQuery or whatever you want to start doing with whatever data sets you have. So I think that's going to be a big push. That's just from that side. And I think as you see like the VMs being brought into the Kubernetes world, because you're going to do your manifest that way, you got to worry now about the full kind of Windows VM. So OPA policies, for an example, might come in handy there. The service mesh, dealing with the VMs and that. So I think that's going to be a big push this year. And you see it with projects like Project Tanzu from VMware. So you see that they've taken the opposite approach. Here's our VMs, we're specialists, let's bring Kubernetes in. Then you'll see the Kubernetes vendors going that way to say, look, we see a benefit in one manifest to deploy VMs, containers.
Yeah, 100%.
So,
I mean, we're seeing it right now. Within our base, the question is, well, why stop here, right? Why can't we extend this out? Why can't we just have a single way, a single workflow? So even us at our early stage, we're seeing that as well, and it's been incredible. So guys, thank you so much. Great predictions. And who knows, with the state of the world, how things are going. But I just wanted to thank everyone for your time on the call. Scott, big thank you to you. It's always a pleasure hearing you talk. You're passionate. And I just wanted to spend a second here and talk about the book between yourself and Mark. Where can we get it? And something that we could share with everyone on the call, and maybe the people who weren't able to make it. Where can we get it? How can we get it? And get it to us now, right? So you can maybe share some insights.
Yeah, definitely. It's available on, of course, Amazon globally, and the publisher's website as well, Packet. It's actually on Safari Books Online as well. So if anybody, on the call subscribes to that, I think it's a great service because you get so many books, way too many. It'll keep you busy. But it was added to that a couple months ago, which is great. It just means more people can look at it. And we're we'd love some feedback on it. Well, we've received quite a bit, and all positive, which has been very, very surprising to me, just because it's the internet. There's always going to be some kind of troll on the internet that just wants to hit you, but hasn't happened yet. I'm waiting for it. It's not going to happen, but we want to write more. So we want to make sure that we're on the right path of that this is beneficial. Like I tell everybody, you don't get rich from writing computer books. You just want to be able to get out there and help some people and just talk about it. If you're passionate about it, you like talking about it. And I think I said it to you guys. I'll talk to a 3-year-old down the street about Kubernetes if they stop, just because I want to talk about it. It's like, hey, you got to learn this. It's going to help you.
No doubt. And we'd love to have you on as much as possible. Always a pleasure connecting. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned working with you, Scott, is the fact I think you've got the book, you've done it yourself. You're able to explain to folks who maybe are just getting started on the journey, who are maybe, on day 2 and wondering what the hell did I just do? So it's always good to get you on board. But that's about it, guys. We're at the top of the hour. Tony, thank you. Scott, big thank you. And we'll be following up with everyone who was able to attend shortly. But other than that, have a good one, guys. Thank you so much. And hopefully talk to y'all soon.
Thanks,
thank
Scott.
you to everybody.
Thank you,
and guys, thank you very much for having me on.
Always a pleasure.
Great. Thanks, guys. Bye, everybody.